Okay. So hopefully this is not going to take us 2 hours, but I figured I'd rather let us out early than underestimate and have us go long like I did with the AR gear. But here are the things that I want to cover tonight. I want to talk about sort of the first things you do when you get your maps and your instructions at the race, kind of integrating information, map management, route planning, strategy, time management, that sort of thing. So that initial planning component, and then I figure maybe like half an hour to cover all that, and then I'll go into screen sharing and we'll talk about information on the map and actual navigation techniques. And I've laid out just like 10 points on the Carter Caves map, and we'll talk about how to navigate each of those points, selecting an attack point, and navigating to each of those points. And we'll use some of the different navigation techniques, orienteering techniques, to get us from point to point. And I'm figuring maybe an hour for that. So if we stay on track, maybe about an hour and a half, and that'll give us some buffer there. So, sound good?
Yeah. At some point where I'll have to get off here and then I'll try to get back on. We're doing food pickup.
Oh, okay.
So I'll be like wiping stuff down before it gets put away.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, no problem. Just, yeah.
I'll just mute it, and then when I disappear, you'll know why.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Thanks for the heads up. So what I've got on the screen here is a sample map. This is actually the map that Orienteering Cincinnati produced for Carter Caves. This is kind of the north side of the map. And you'll get something really similar to this for the race. My intent is that the main map will definitely be using this Orienteering Cincinnati map. It'll be at a 1 to 10,000 scale. And my intent is that we'll be able to have your entire course on this map and the Carter Caves trail map. I'll open that up in a minute. But we'll be using more the southern half of the map, more so than the northern half for the race. But just to give you an idea in terms of planning your map cases and stuff like that, 11 by 17 should be the largest that you'll have. And then the Carter Caves trail map looks like this. It's a little larger than 11 by 17, but it's a topographic map that really highlights the trails. And this is better for the biking sections, is what you'll use this primarily for. It's a 1 to 16,500 scale, and it's got a graphical scale at the bottom as well. So you'll get those two things. And the first thing I do whenever I start a race is start to integrate the information that I'm given. And so, for example, I'm going to look at any information that's on this park map that might be useful to me. I'm going to be using my orienteering map primarily for navigation of the foot sections, the trekking legs, because it's a better scale, and because the points are going to be on your O map. They're going to be on this Orienteering Cincinnati map. So the points will all be on here, which means I'm going to be using this map primarily for my trekking navigation. But I've got this handy dandy park map that tells me, for instance, the names of all the trails. It also has distances on it. It's got, you know, all the little trail segments, what the distances are. So that can be a real handy shortcut. Instead of having to wheel out some of my potential route choices, I can just look at what the distance is on the park map. So that's the first thing I do, is I always sort of integrate, look at all the information the race director's given me, and see how I can integrate those to make my route planning and race planning more efficient. So reading the instructions, it's amazing the mistakes people make in races, and I've been guilty of this too, but simply for not reading the instructions carefully. So I always recommend that the very first thing you do is sit down and read through your course instructions that I give you word for word. We are really careful, really meticulous about the wording we use in these course instructions. And so you need to be just as meticulous in reading through them because there's lots of information in there. One of the things that you'll want to take note of right off the bat before you start marking up your map is, are there mandatory points and optional points? That's obviously going to need to go into your planning and your strategy. If you don't think you're going to be able to get all the points on the course, then you need to know which ones are mandatory and optional, and make sure that in your race strategy, you've got all of those mandatory points in there before you start thinking about the optional points you're going to go after. And then time management is obviously a critical factor in how many of those optional points you go after. Time management is a mathematical function, really. So Diane McKim, I expect you to excel at that. But you know, I see a lot of people who just sort of kind of look at the map and take sort of this hunch based on, I don't know, kind of like a spatial recognition thing, but it's not that at all. It's more arithmetic. It's how fast am I going to go? How much time do I have? And so you sit down and you do the math. You need to have an idea going in of what your speed is going to be in the different disciplines. And that's just a matter of logging those miles during your training and keeping track of it. So, you know, when your team goes out and trains together, or when you go out during quarantine and train by yourself, make sure that you take note of what your average speed is over distances. And you want to look at it over the particular terrain we're going to be on is pretty steep. There's a lot of cliffiness, a lot of steep stuff. It's rugged and rocky. So you're going to be going, you know, as slow as your slowest average on foot. And bear in mind that you're going to be wearing a pack on your back. You know, and so a trekking average speed in this kind of terrain over an 8-hour race might be something like 2 miles an hour. Probably 2 to 3 miles an hour is as good an average as you're going to hope to get. Bearing in mind that you're going to be stopping at points, you're going to be navigating, you're not going to be moving nonstop that whole time. And so, you know, for a particular trekking leg, yeah, knowing that average speed is going to help you figure out how many of those points you're going to go after. Same thing for biking. What's your average biking speed on, you know, gravel road versus more technical single track with some hills? You're going to be pushing some areas, things like that. So know what your average speed is, your average speed of paddling in the boat. That's just a matter of going out and finding a known distance on a lake and going out and timing yourself and figure out how long it's going to take. So know your team's average speed in all those disciplines, and that's going to help you do the math that you need to figure out how much you can cover over the course of a given leg. Okay, so I brought just a few things, but I think you both know, Sarah, I know you've done some races. Before I go to screen sharing, let me just show you the other fun little thing. I made this today. I came up with this idea. I took an AARP card that was sent to my husband. He decided he's not AARP ready just yet. And the back of this card is white, which is super handy. So I took that. It's just basically take any credit card that you're not using anymore that's got a white background on it. And I used that to make a little scale that I can now carry along with my compass. So I made a 1 to 10,000 scale on one side, and I made a 1 to 24,000 scale on the other side, because, you know, in most adventure races, we very typically are on a 1 to 24,000 map. Can you see it better? Yeah. A 1 to 24,000 map. So that'll always be handy for me in this particular race, because we have the luxury of this fabulous detailed O map. We're going to use it, and it's going to be at 1 to 10,000. And so I've written my centimeters there. A credit card, a standard credit card, is about 8.5 centimeters. So I marked every centimeter, every half centimeter. And so I know that those are 100 meter, you know, every centimeter is 100 meters on a 1 to 10,000 map. And then I marked the in between. So I've got basically a 50-meter scale. And I just put it on a little cord. I figure I would clip this on my backpack. I thought about putting it on the string with my compass, because I use a base plate compass in adventure racing. I decided I wanted it separate from my compass, mainly just to be out of the way, because I won't be using it nearly as much as I'll be using my compass. So I put it on a length about that long, I figure I would clip that to my backpack, and then I can just real quickly in the field lay it down on my map if I need to estimate my distance. So there's that little pro tip of the day. You know, I've got the little gradations on my compass, but they wear off so quickly that you can barely see them. This is one of my newer compasses, so they're actually pretty decent right now, but they wear off quickly. So yeah, I thought that little card was handy. And then I just used, oh, what's it called? The really strong tape. Golly, well, it's a really tough tape that I put over that to keep it from rubbing off. I used a Sharpie marker and then taped over it so that the stuff doesn't rub off. I can't think of the name of the tape now. Anyway, okay, so those are just a few little tools. And I'm going to go to screen sharing now. I'm going to stop the video, share the screen. Okay, so this is just a closer look at that Carter Caves trail map that we'll get. Here is our beautiful orienteering map. So what I've laid out here is just a sample score style course where you've got the control code in front, the number of points in the back. For ease of reference, I've just made them each worth 10 points. Can you all still hear me okay if I'm over here?
I can
Yes.
see you.
Okay, great. So we've got 10 points here. And let's say that this is a trekking leg and we've got 2 hours. So that's 120 minutes. Let's say we give ourselves a 10-minute cushion. So we've got 110 minutes to play with. Our average per control is going to be what? It's not going to be 11 minutes, right? Because we've got the finish. Don't forget to add the finish in when you're thinking about how much time you've got. You can't just add your 10 controls because you still got to get to the finish. You don't get to stop at the last control. So basically what we've got are 11 controls. So if we give ourselves 110 minutes, that would be 10 minutes per control. If you're planning to clear this course, then that's what your average is going to have to be. So, you know, someone who's been racing for a while and who has a pretty good feel for a 1 to 10,000 map might be able to look at that and say, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can do a 10-minute average across that map. I suggest that where you start is wheeling out the distance that it's going to take you if you clear this course, and figuring out what your average speed is, and then you'll have an idea, a more precise idea whether or not you're going to be able to do that. And this depends on having the time to do that as well, right? And you're going to have time to plan your course. So if I were sitting down planning my 2-hour trek on this course, what I would do is I would take my ScaleX map wheel and I would wheel out my, what I think to be the ideal route from all of these controls and figure out what that distance is. And I've already done that. I can tell you it's about 8.5 kilometers. So just over 5 miles. So 5 miles to clear all of those controls and make it to the finish. So in orienteering, Sarah, I don't know if you've done any orienteering. I know you've done some adventure races, but in orienteering, the start is a triangle. The finish is this double circle. And then the checkpoints or controls are, of course, all of the circles. So start to finish to clear this course, a little over 5 miles. And we've got 2 hours. So that's going to be 2.5 miles an hour in order to clear this. And that assumes that we execute our route perfectly. And remember, I already said, I think probably 2 miles an hour, at least for me, is going to be a good average speed over this kind of terrain. And we've got some controls that I can see are going to be fairly tricky. What that tells me is I shouldn't plan on going out here and clearing this course because I'm probably not going to do that. And I would rather know that on the front end so that I can plan the most efficient route that drops some controls, and to get all the way out here to number 38, for example, and realize that that I'm running out of time. And now I've gone way out here to this control, and it makes no sense for me to do that. Let me find my little sharing toolbar. There's a little sharing toolbar that I need that has little controls on. let's see, here it is. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. So there we go. All right. So I know I've got about 5 miles to cover. I know I'm going to travel around about 2 miles an hour, which tells me I'm not going to get all of these controls. So the next thing I'm going to do is try to decide which ones to drop. And I'm going to think about things like the terrain, the distance, and also the difficulty of navigation. As I look at this, I see I've got what seems to be a pretty close cluster of 5 on this east half. And then I've got kind of a western half of the map that are 5 controls that are a lot more spread out. And as I look at this number 40, number 38, number 39, I can see that those are also going to be a lot more challenging navigation wise because they're not near any, you know, obvious features. So that to me makes my decision on which ones to go after easy. I'm going to start by going this direction and cover this eastern half of the map. And then the question is, how many do I drop? I'm figuring I'm going to have to drop at least 2 based on my speed, maybe even 3. But the nice thing about taking the route this direction is I'm not only hitting these easier points first and quicker, but then by the time I get to this 36 and 37, I know I'm going to be dropping 38 and 39. The question is, am I going to have time to get 40 before I get to the finish? Well, the nice thing is I've kind of made 40 now on the way back. So I'll be pretty close to the finish before I have to make my decision whether to go after 40 or not. And so, you know, the only possibility is maybe if I have trouble at some of these early ones and I start running out of time, is it possible I would not have time to go get 37? Or maybe I'll want to head this way from 36, and if I've got time, I'll go get 40 then and drop 37. So I'm going to mark on my map that at number 36, I need to check my time. And I'm going to just write a note right up here in the margin. I'm going to put a big star and write time, ? And that's my reminder that when I get to 36, before I start heading over here to 37, I'm going to check my time. Because if I took a lot longer than I thought I was going to over here, look at this nice little trail all the way down. Let me blow that up a little bit. If I took longer than I thought, then I've got this nice trail to the road. Pick up this power line trail to the finish, right? I've got a nice, easy handrail beeline to the finish from there. So I'm going to check my time there and see if I've got time to go get 37. If so, then I'm making my beeline back. Now do I have time to go get 40 or not? So know which ones you're going to drop. I'm for sure dropping 38, right? It's out here in the middle of nowhere. And I'm probably going to have to drop 39 based on my estimate of my speed. I'm hoping I'll get 40. I'm going to save that one to the very end. It's close to the finish. And then I'm going to make myself a note right here that says, you know, just be sure you're moving as fast as you expected to be before you head over this big ridge to 37, because that's going to be slow going getting over there. Okay, so we've got our bailout plan. And so by the time I get to 36, if I've had time, I'm also going to have, when I wheeled this out at the start, I'm going to have written my distance to 36, whatever that point is where you're checking your time checkpoint. It's nice to know what your distance to that point is and what your distance to the finish is from there, right? Because then when you check your time, you know what your average moving speed has been to get to there, and you know how far you've got to get to the finish. So up here at 36 in the margin, I'm going to write time check. And then again, assuming I've had time in my planning, I'm going to make a note that it was, you know, say 3 miles to there, 2.5 or whatever it was. And I'm going to make a note that it's 1.5 miles to the finish. So then I know how much time I'm going to need. I know what my moving speed is. I can make a good decision about how much more I can go for. All right. So once I've figured out my, figured out what I need to drop, figured out what we're going to go after, you know, one really important thing at this point is number one, to make sure that this is a team effort, that everyone's agreed on what the plan is before you set off. For a few reasons. Number one, this is a great way to build your team cohesion and to get buy-in from the other team members. For the navigator, to make them feel included. And sometimes they have great ideas. You know, my teammate Sarah, in this planning stage, will very often see things that I maybe didn't see, and come up with suggestions. So this is a great part of the race, and it's a great way to set off on the right foot with your team members, is to make sure that the primary navigator collaborates and that you have buy-in from the whole team, and that this is a team decision on what you're going to go after. And then it also, importantly, reduces the amount of time that you spend out in the field that's non-productive. What you don't want to do is get here to number 36, your time checkpoint, and you do the calculations and you know how much time you've got left, and then you spend 10 minutes in a team discussion about whether or not you're going to go after 37 or 40, or, you know, these decisions, if you've agreed in advance, okay, if we have X amount of time, we're going after 37. If we don't, we're going beeline back. You make all those decisions ahead of time, get everyone's buy-in, and then you don't waste precious time on the clock making these team decisions out there, because you've already talked about it, everyone's in agreement. You know, at this point in the race, your brain's feeling pretty fried, you're all, you know, on edge, you're trying to hurry up and get back. This isn't the time where you want to sit down and have, you know, a team conference about whether or not you're going to go after 37. So it's great to have had those discussions with the team in advance. Everybody's in agreed, this is the plan. Which doesn't mean you can't all agree to change the plan, but at least that's your default. Okay, so you've got your plan in place, everybody's agreed, it's time to mark up your maps. So I use highlighters. I use a different color for the bike, the hike, and the paddle, just so that they're easier to distinguish when I'm in the field. I don't get confused. I use Sharpie markers and make lots of notes in the margins about distances, time estimates, bailout points. I'll transfer that information from the park map onto this map at this point. Yeah, the edges of my map always, you know, have chicken scratch all over them. And then I'm going to write down the order of CPs to be visited. And a good place to do that is going to be on the back of your punch card. So my suggestion is that you have whoever on the team is holding the punch card be someone other than the primary navigator. And if you do it that way, then having the order of CPs on the back of the punch card serves as a great double check for the navigator, and it gives the other team members, again, a little more interaction with the map, in the sense that, as far as the backup for the navigator, when the team member punching the card goes and punches number 35, they can look at the back of the punch card and know that your plan is next to go to 36. So they punch 35 and they say to the navigator, okay, so we're going to 36 next, right? And the navigator says, yep, we're going to 36. And so that's a great way, when your brain is not firing like it would if you weren't, you know, exhausted and dehydrated. It's great to have someone giving you that double check that you haven't like missed one, you're not looking the wrong direction and set off back for number 34, you know, whatever. It's just a nice double check. And it lets the person who's not holding the map feel like they've got a little better sense of the progression of the race. So it lets them feel a little bit more in control. So having that order of controls on the back of the punch card, really nice double check. And then you've got a third person who's not holding a map and not holding a punch card. My suggestion, if I had the luxury of a third person on my team, is that would be the person that I relied on to keep track of our distance. And and basically time management. So this is going to be the person who's always keeping an eye on her watch. And if she knows how to pace count and you can use pace counting, that's terrific. My teammate Sarah and I tend to measure our time or our distance by time. I'm trying to be a better pace counter because I can tell you the best orienteers in the world, the best adventure race navigators in the world, they all pace count, and it's a wonderful skill to have in your toolbox. I've never done it, mainly because I just didn't have the discipline or the will to go out and practice and really work with it. And that's what it takes to be really good at it, is to practice it a lot. But I'm committed to doing better with that this year and to improving my pace counting, mainly for orienteering. For adventure racing, Sarah and I have always been able to get by with the fact that she has a really good sense of how fast we're moving. She's always been a runner, and so she has a very good just internal sense of how fast we're moving at any given time. And so I can tell her we need to go 500 meters or we need to go 1,200 meters. And she has a pretty good, she'll look at her watch and has a pretty good sense based on how fast we're moving in the terrain of how long it's going to take us to get there. And so she'll tell me, okay, we've gone about 200 meters, we've gone about 400 meters. Whether it's by time or by pace counting, having someone other than the primary map reader doing that, I find to be really helpful, because at least for me, it's just too much for me to try to keep in my head. And then that person's always checking her watch and making sure that you're moving how you need to be moving, you're hitting your goals, your averages, and they're also reminding everybody to eat and drink when they need to. And the other thing, of course, is that gives that third person a job as well. And that's really great for team dynamics if everybody has a job all the time. They're always engaged. They always feel like they're contributing. And don't just leave it all on the primary navigator with two other people just kind of going along and feeling like they're not really contributing, because everybody likes to feel like they're doing something for the team. So you've marked everything up. You've written down your CPs, what order they're going to be in. Everybody knows their jobs. So now it's time to seal everything up, make sure it's accessible but waterproof. I talked about my recommendations for how to seal and waterproof everything sort of separately in the gear discussion, and that's on the website under the photo video link. If you didn't see that, you can go back and take a look at that, and you can see the system that I use. And now we're ready to move on to actually navigating to some of these points. Any questions, comments up to now? Nope. Good. All right. So can you all see me moving the screen and my little hand here on the map? Okay, awesome. So, all right. So we're going to start at the start. We're going to number 31. The very first thing we're going to do, so this is not, let me say, this is not necessarily the order I would take these in if I were going out and doing this as a score style course. I am going to do these in numerical order, 31, 32, 33, 34, just for the sake of talking about the different navigation techniques. So don't think that I would necessarily recommend this as an order to tackle these in a race. So now we're moving kind of. Hey, Lisa Devers. You got here just in time. We just finished talking about sort of time management, race strategy, things like that. And now we're going to move into actual sort of navigation techniques. And we're going to talk about navigating each of these points from the start. We're going to go 31, 32, 33 in order, not necessarily how I would approach them in the race, but I set these up to give us particular problems and particular techniques that we would use going from one to the next. So from the start to number 31, the first thing I'm going to do is pick my attack point. So I'm never starting here at where I am at the start and figuring out how to get to 31. I'm starting at 31 and figuring out how to get there. So I'm going to start at 31 and then sort of backtrack to where I am. And the reason I do that is because the first thing I'm going to do is pick my attack point, and my attack point is near the control. It's not where I am. And so my attack point for 31, so 31, first of all, I can tell you, you'll get a control sheet with descriptions like this. So 31, small erosion gully, northwest end. So my circle, okay, so the erosion gully is these little brown dots, right? It's a ditch line, basically. An erosion gully is a ditch line, and you can see what you've got here is a little creek that's coming out of the top of this reentrant. You've got a little creek coming down, and then the water just kind of sinks away, because this whole area, Carter Caves, is all karst topography. So you get these little springs and little creeks that pop up and then disappear, and it's going underground here. And you have just kind of this erosion gully that's below that. So the little brown dots are an erosion gully, northwest end. So the first thing I'm going to do is think about what's my attack point going to be for this control. The attack point is an object that's close to the checkpoint that you know you can reliably navigate to. And you want it to be, you know, as close to the checkpoint as you can get, obviously, because that reduces the room for error once you leave your attack point. And so in this case, we've got this power line, this line right here with the hash marks across it. That's a power line. And something a lot of people, even orienteers, don't realize is that when they made this map, these little hash marks for the power line, those aren't randomly put on there for the power line symbol. Those little hash marks are where there's actually a power pole. And so see that little hash mark right there, really close to our control? There's a power pole right there in that power line. So that is going to be a really reliable, great attack point for me. I'm going to use that power pole as my attack point, and it's also where this power line bends, right? There's a sharp angle in the power line. So that's going to be a great attack point. It's something I'm going to know exactly where I am when I hit that. And look at how close it is to my control. I'll be practically on top of my control by the time I get there. So that's my attack point. Now I figure out the best way from where I am at the start to get to that attack point. And you can see in this case, it jumps out at you very easily. I'm going to take this trail off this road. This thin tan line is the road. This is the old cart path. So this whole thing up here is what used to be the golf course. The golf course has been closed now. So you've got this big ridge top and all of these little paved paths through here. So on an orienteering map, pavement is this tan, you know, this light tan color. So these are all paved paths. It's not a road, it's the golf cart paths. So we're starting, in this map anyway, we're starting up here at what used to be the little clubhouse. And so I'm just gonna follow these cart paths out, hit the road, down to the trail, and I'm into number 31. So I've just found my first control. And that one was pretty straightforward. You all feel free to unmute if you want. If you have any questions, yeah, speak up anytime. All right, so 32 is my next one I'm headed to. 32, the clue is going to be, let's see, boulder, east foot. So we've got, as you can see, lots of boulders. So there are two things on an orienteering map that are black: man-made features and rock features. Man-made features are pretty obvious. They're these buildings, they're the trails, all of that. The rock features at Carter Caves, as you can see, are plentiful. These are all going to be cliff lines. This is a big, wide, broad, steep, long cliff line. You can get an idea of how tall the cliff is by how many contour lines it's covering up. So this one is going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 contour lines. And actually that's something we didn't talk about. When we got our map, one of the first things we would have done, if I had remembered to mention it, is looked at our contour interval. So great information on our map, 1 to 10,000, which we knew already. Our contour interval is 5 meters, so about 15 feet. So for every one of those contour lines that this cliff line is covering, it's losing or gaining 15 feet of elevation. So that's a big, tall cliff line right there. And all of these are just big, huge boulders, rock faces along. You can see that there's this band of cliff line that runs all the way around this ridge top. And then it just kind of breaks down here is what you've got, lots of breaks in that cliff. And so this particular clue was boulder. If we look right at the dead center of this circle, it's one of these boulders right here. And so one of the things, the reason I picked this leg is to talk about map simplification. Map simplification is screening out all of the small details, kind of the map noise, and focusing on the main features that you're going to see going from one control to the next. And in this particular case, the main features, depending on the route you select, the main features are going to be either this trail, this olive green area means it's an out of bounds area, and the 2 hash marks on that fence means it's an uncrossable fence. So there's some fenced in thing here. I can tell you what it is. It's the sewage treatment facility. If I take this high route over the ridge, then that's going to be a main feature. This bend in the trail with the pit right there, and this is a big steep reentrant. You can see how defined that reentrant is right there. So this is where the trail's bending around that reentrant, and you've got a pit. So that's a very identifiable, that sharp bend in the trail is going to be very identifiable. So I want to keep an eye on that no matter which route I take. And then the next thing, when I get up here to all this noisy stuff, what am I going to pay attention to so that I don't get bogged down and confused by all of these things? Well, to me, the thing that really stands out is that what this trail is doing is it's basically going north, has this slight little jog to the right, but then it makes this curve and starts heading northwest pretty distinctly, doesn't it? And what it's doing is it's curving around this big spur, right? You've got this ridge and you've got this spur going out this ridge. So you've got this eastern pointing spur, and this trail is going north, 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 up northwest after it gets around that spur. So to me, that is kind of the big feature that I'm going to focus on as I start heading this way, and I'm going to pay attention to, because I'm not going to be able to read all of these. I'm not going to be able to read all of these rocks and cliffs. I'm going to get totally confused if I focus on this stuff, because there's just way too much of it, too much noise. So I'm going to focus on whichever route I take, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to key in on this very sharp bend in the trail with the pit beside it, because I'm going to be able to notice that. Then I'm going to keep an eye on my distance traveled. I'm going to maybe find this boulder right beside the trail. And then I'm going to look for where I see this spur starting to bend and that trail heading off to the left. And I know it should be just above me to the left. If I head on out the trail, obviously I've overshot it a little bit, but I'm going to be looking ahead, and I'm going to be looking for that, where that spur is breaking off to the left and starting to round out there. And my backup is going to be keeping an eye on my compass. If I start heading northwest considerably, then I've overshot it. So those are the different little catching features along the way. But the point there is to kind of screen out some of this noise and look at the big main features that you want to focus on. So in terms of route selection, there are really 2 basic options here. You can take the trail around. That's going to be your surest navigationally, your surest option. It's a pretty long way around the barn. The other option is take this trail back up here, hop up onto the road and over and back down. And so this basically means you're crossing 1, 2, 3, 4 contour lines. So 5-meter contour lines is about 60 feet of elevation gain. So you're going to gain 60 feet of elevation. It's nice clear woods right here, so that's nice. And then you're basically right back where you would be if you took this trail around. And obviously much shorter distance. So the question is, are you more comfortable staying on the trail, not having to think about getting over this saddle, not doing the climb, but going a lot further? Or are you pretty comfortable? I mean, this is going to be easy enough, right? Taking the trail up to the road, then you just got to come down this other side. So this is a saddle right here. You can see there's a high point over here, a high point over here. So it's where the saddle kind of pinches in, re-enter on the other side. That to me, given how much shorter it is compared to the trail going all the way around, I'm probably going to do that. Even though I'm not a climber, I also don't run very fast. If I'm a super fast runner, you know, maybe this is great. I just get on the trail and can sort of mindlessly make my way there. I'm not that much faster on flat, so I might as well just slog it over the saddle because I'm going to keep up a decent pace and I'm going to be able to jog down this other side. So I would probably do that. I would see my pit and the trail. I'd grab the trail and then I would keep an eye on how long it takes me to get from here to there. I would use my little scale that I made and I would lay that on my map, figure out how far that is. I'd have my pace counter tell me when we've gone that far. I would look for this bend, and then I'm going to look up to my left for a couple of boulders coming down really close to the trail, and there's my point. All right, 32 to 33. Lisa, feel free to unmute at any time if you've got any questions. So 32 to 33, this one is going to be all about route choice. So my route choice is 32 to 33. I've got at least three that jump out at me. 33, I can tell you, is the Erosion Gully Junction. So we've got this reentrant coming up, Erosion Gully branches out. That's our control. So if we start there and think about our attack point, a couple of different attack points depending on the route we choose. This little building right here, that's the cabin area. If you're familiar with Carter Caves, this is a little group of cottages. And so we've got a cottage here. That's a pretty obvious good attack point. I'm going to know which cottage that is. Or we've also got the trail crossing this ditch line down here, reentrant at the bottom. That's a pretty good attack point too. It's right after a couple of other trail junctions. So I'm going to know when I've gotten to that point too. So either one of those are good attack points. So then if I back up from there and think about what my route might be, if I use the cottage, I see two options that stand out. One would be taking this road, the trail. What that means is from my point to get up to there, I'm going to have to come up this broad spur and I'm going to try to have to hit this trail from the end. That to me is never a good proposition. Hitting a trail perpendicular is not so hard. Hitting a trail from the end like that is really hard, especially if you're in open, clear woods like this, where the trail's not going to be as obvious as it is if you're in thicker woods. This is a broad spur. This is a big, huge, flat, broad area. Trying to navigate off that and hit the end of that trail makes me very nervous. So that automatically lowers that route in my esteem. Even though it's pretty straight, which I like, I really don't like that start. So let's see what our other options are. I saw that off the end of this little cottage loop, there's a trail headed down here. And I see that trail comes down in a gap in that cliff line. Looks like it kind of disappears here, but I see a trail coming out here, and that's my trail. So I wonder what's happening right here. That's when I think about, oh, hey, wait a second. Maybe my trail map's going to tell me. Well, here's my cottage loop right here. Here's where my control was over here somewhere. Right there's my control, I think. So, hey, Fern Bridge, that's what's going on right there. This whole funky looking thing, look, there's a bridge of land right there in this cliff line. That's an arch is what that is. That's the top of Fern Bridge Arch right there. So when I look at this map, I can see my trail is continuous. Fabulous. So I know that I can get through there. And that's what it does. The trail just comes up, it goes right under that arch and comes right up and out that way. So that seems like a good possibility. The only other thing that I see you might do is when you get up to the top of that trail, you could head right and take the trail around here and go up. The one advantage to that is it saves you a little bit of climb because you're coming in below the control and climbing up to it. Whereas if you go this way, you're going to climb just a little bit extra and then drop down to it. So either one of those are both going to be fine options. This one's a little bit longer, not quite as much climb. This is just like one extra contour line and a little more direct. So they're probably about equidistant. And that's 32 to 33. All right. $33 to $34. Okay, so 34, what is that? Let's see. Cave, south part. All right, so that's fun. We're going to get to go to a cave. And so as I look at this, I'm seeing this like whole big wide band of black going around here. So the first thing I want to think about is, okay, that's going to be, I know now, a big rock cliff I'm not going to be able to cross. So when I get to this, what's called a cave, am I going to want to be on top of that or am I going to want to be below it? Because you can see it's going to make a difference here in how I approach that. Well, if it's a cave, then I've probably got to figure I want to be below the cliff. And in this case, what we've got is Horn Hollow Cave. We can see this stream coming in this way. It disappears. And then we've got like a little pool here. As the stream continues, it disappears again, comes out again here. So this is Horn Hollow Cave. The whole length of that you can actually trek through. And so we've put the control in this case right here at this southern opening to Horn Hollow Cave. And so I know that I want to be under this cliff line because the cave's not going to be on top of that. There's nothing else there. So I want to approach this from this direction on the bottom. So what's my attack point going to be? If I'm wanting to approach from down low, it seems to me a pretty decent attack point. If I'm coming in on this trail gets really close to the creek right here, and then it heads off across this form line right here, contour line, away from the creek again. That should be a pretty distinct departure. And since I'm wanting to come in low and this is all nice and clear, that looks like a good place to me to leave that trail and just stick by the creek and come in along the creek like that. Because otherwise I'm taking the trail. These are pretty nice distinct points where the trail bends that way and that way. But then number one, I'm climbing a couple of extra contour lines and it's getting me above this cliff line when really where I want to be coming in is down here low. So I'm going to look for where that trail comes in really close to the creek and then just hop down and walk the creek in. So with that as my attack point, I'm backing up to here and figuring out my route. So obviously I'm taking this trail. This looks like actually a kind of a footpath. You can see a little bit where it's clear right there. So that tells me that must be pretty nice and clear. And look, it's right across the road from, you see this band of cliff, that's not going to be passable, but it looks like we've got a break there. So if I just keep backing up, we've got a trail here. If you were at the Women's Adventure Weekend and did some climbing with us, this is where you were right here. These great big boulders are all of the boulders at the base of that cliff. This right here is the cliff that we climbed, and these are the stairs and the little trail down to there. So this is a climbing area. We'll just take this ditch line right down to the trail, take the trail down to here, and then we're going to bushwhack this ditch line and re-entrant down and around, across, pick up our trail into Horn Hollow Cave. All right. That was 34. Yeah, and then we've got our what we call a catching feature or a backstop. If we drift, if our brain drifts, whatever, and we end up passing this up, then our backstop here is going to be, we've got this big reentrant and ditch line coming in. This bend in the trail obviously is a nice obvious stopping point. If we've gone too far, then we can still back up. So 34 to 35. 35, our clue is going to be reentrant. Reentrant is where we've got a V pointing uphill. Here's the downhill side with the stream. Our uphill we can tell because we've got the closed circles. Now this closed circle you'll see is a dashed line instead of a solid contour line. And these dashed lines are unique to orienteering. We don't have these on regular topographic maps. And these dashed lines are really useful to know. They're called form lines. And what they're doing is the mapper looked up and said, let's use this one over here because it's really obvious. This little circle right here. The mapper looked up and said, you know what? There's a really noticeable circular hilltop over here. The elevation isn't enough to make it to the next contour line, but it's enough that you're going to notice it. And therefore, I'm going to let people know that there's this kind of distinct little knoll, this distinct little point to this hilltop. Because it's not high enough to reach the next contour line, I can't make it a solid contour line. I'm going to use this form line so that they know it's noticeable, but it's not 5 meters high. And so these form lines are always great navigational tools because you know they're noticeable. The reason the mapper put it there is because it's noticeable. And so if you're trying to figure out whether or not you've gotten to the top of the hill or the top of this ridge line, knowing where that form line is and the shape of that is really helpful because you know you're going to notice it. You can use that as a navigational aid because you know you're going to notice it. The fact that the mapper put it there when he didn't have to tells you it's noticeable. So that's what that top is. He's telling you the shape of the top of that ridge or hill. All right, so we've got a reentrant here. That's the top of the reentrant. That's the top of the reentrant on the other side. It's really shallow, but hopefully you can kind of tell. He stopped mapping there because that gets onto private property. Here again, we've got a fence line with the double hash marks. That means it's not crossable, which isn't to say that you wouldn't physically be able to cross it. You probably can. It's probably just a farm fence. You could hop over it easily enough. But in orienteering, it's illegal to cross that. And that's because that's a property boundary. So when you see the double hashes, it doesn't mean you couldn't cross it if you tried. It means you're not allowed to cross it. So that's an uncrossable fence. And that's why we don't have the rest of this map here. But you can tell by what this is doing that that's a saddle right there. And that's going to be a pretty distinct saddle. It looks to me like it pinches in pretty tight. And we've got this noticeable hilltop over here. So that saddle with this fence line right here seems to me to be a great attack point. So I'm going to use that saddle and that fence line as my attack point to this reentrant because the saddle is the top of the reentrant, right? A reentrant points up, and if you've got a hill on both sides, it's pointing directly to the saddle. So if you're in that saddle and you head northwest, you're going to be right along the center line of that reentrant. So if I use that as my attack point, then backing up to my control here, that fence line, uncrossable fence, I know is going to be a pretty good handrail. Now there are some fences on orienteering maps that are not great to use for navigation, and those are going to be the fences. Let's see, there's a bunch of them down here, I know, because this is old farm fields. So look at all these old fences with the 1 hash mark. What that means is it's a crossable fence. And so this whole area, you can tell, used to be a farm field, used to be farm fields, pasture land. They probably had a bunch of cows out here. And these are all old farm fences. They're probably all ruined. good luck finding a lot of them. You can't rely on these at all. Sometimes they're buried on the ground. Sometimes they'll be up and noticeable, but not always. And you can't tell which are which, except that we use a symbol in orienteering that tells you if the fence is ruined. So if it says ruined fence, very often it's on the ground and you're not even going to be able to see it. So, you know, a little thing like that, I would never count on that. If you do see it, then that can be great and very useful, but I wouldn't count on that for navigation if I didn't have any, you know, if I didn't have to, if I had any other choices. But this fence, being this property boundary and uncrossable, I know that that's going to be a good solid fence. Whoever owns that property right there has a nice solid fence there. So that's going to be pretty reliable. So I'm going to use that fence then, since my saddle's right there by that fence, I'm going to use that as a handrail because I don't have much else going on up here to use. So that's going to be a handrail. A handrail is just a linear feature that we use like a handrail on steps. You can use it basically like a trail, and that could be anything like a really distinct ditch line, a creek, a fence, a power line, a property line, any of those things that are linear features that you can use to guide you like a handrail. So we're leaving out of Horn Hollow. We've got this trail, trail. Now all we got to do is hook these two up, and that shouldn't be too difficult. We've got this cliff line right here, and you can see the continuation of it over here. So if we head out off the trail right at this bend, it's basically bending up where this break in the cliff line is and bending around. So when my trail bends around, that's when I know I'm going to head off just west of north. And I've got a pretty good catching feature here. I've just got to hit that fence line and I don't have too far to go. So I'm just going to take a bearing that's roughly west of north, like what, 350 degrees, something like that. Just to make sure that I hit that fence and don't end up missing it. It's kind of thick through here, so I'm not going to be going too fast. And if I keep this cliff line off to my right, I should be able to hit that fence line with a fairly rough bearing. And then I'm just going to follow the fence line like a handrail around until I see my saddle. I'll know that I've missed my saddle if I start to climb again, right? See that form line right there? That form line is the hill on the other side of the saddle. So that's my backstop. So I'm going to see my saddle, head down my saddle right to my re-entrant. All right. Questions about that one? Handrail. All right. 35 to 36. All right. So attack points, my nearest attack point, nearest feature that I know I can find. Well, from my control, which is a boulder cluster, so the circles, the little black circles, those are individual boulders. A black triangle like that means it's a boulder cluster. So my clue for this one is boulder cluster, so I know it's that triangle right there in between these two larger boulders. And in terms of attack point, well, I've got my fence up here again, but no real distinct point in the fence so much. Maybe there's a bend there, but as I look at that, that would be a long way around anyway. I don't really want to do all of this up and down following that fence line. I've also got this trail right here. I've got a distinct bend in the trail there, but that's the other side of where I want to be. I've got this spot where the trail crosses over this re-entrant. And that's a pretty big re-entrant, right? If you watch what the contour lines are doing, that's a big shift. So that's a big re-entrant, and it's the only one along this hillside. If I'm taking this trail in, after I round this spur, that's really my only re-entrant. I'm gonna round the spur, I'm gonna hit this big re-entrant, and then my control's not far from there. So that seems like a pretty good attack point. I'm going to be able to identify that. It's going to be the first big re-entrant I hit once I come around that bend. and my trail goes right through it. So I'm going to use that trail reentrant junction as my attack point. If I do that, I'm probably just going to take the trail around. Where does my trail go? It goes around to here. Hey, that's not bad, is it? So if I'm in my reentrant here, I'm just going to follow my reentrant down to the creek. I've got two options. I can take my creek. I could go up through this saddle and down, but it's not that much longer to come down and take the trail, which means I'm going to contour around that spur instead of over it, right? That's the steep way over. Not too much further for a trail and no hill climb. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to take my trail right around. Here's my attack point. From that point, I'm going to take a bearing and I'm going to be fairly careful. It's not too far, so that helps. And I've got a catching feature, right? My fence. That's the other nice thing about approaching it from here. If I overshoot it, that fence is going to catch me. So I'm going to take a bearing that's roughly due north and hit my boulder cluster there. All right, 36 to 37. Oh, so this one is all about picking a good attack point. So 37, my clue is pit, and you'll see this is a brown pit, which means that the pit has dirt sides. There are also lots of black pits at Carter Caves, and those are rocky. So a rocky pit is black, an earthen pit is brown. This little smiley face beside it, ironically, is a depression. So a depression is going to be more shallow, and a pit is going to be steeper sided. So the clue for this one, number 37, is pit. So I'm looking for that guy right there. Now the question is, what do I use for an attack point? So the nearest feature that I know I'm going to be able to identify. So my options, I've got this stuff. This is rocky ground, stony ground is what that is. That looks like a fairly distinct band of stony ground, but it's also on the opposite side of the control from where I'm coming from. So maybe not ideal. Maybe that would be a good catching feature, but maybe not a great attack point. Of course, a catching feature is an attack point if you overshoot it, right? So maybe that'll be our attack point if we blow it. Another option is going to be, well, the depression, but if I can find the depression, I can find the pit. So that's not a good attack point. We've got this trail. The thing that would concern me about relying on this trail is this. You see the difference between this trail and this trail? So this trail is this nice continuous dashed line, whereas this one, you see it's got these breaks in the dashes. That's because this is an indistinct trail. So that's the difference between this trail and this trail, is that this is a distinct trail. This is one of the official park trails. And this is an indistinct trail. It's not an official park trail. It's not on the park trail map. It's really more of just a guerrilla path or a really well-defined. We tend not to map deer tracks in this area. There are some places, it just depends on the location and the mapper and sort of how notable it is. But so it's going to be something a little more distinct probably than a deer track, but these are very unreliable. A user-created indistinct path like that, super unreliable. And so that kind of leaves the only other thing, and what I decided I would probably use as my attack point if I were doing this leg, this ditch line right here. See the brown dotted ditch line? It's got this distinct curve and then goes up that way. That's probably going to be pretty reliable, that it's going to be there. And now, one of the tricky things about this, so if we think about, if we figure we're going to use something in this vicinity as our attack point, we're probably going to be coming off this trail, right? So we're going to leave that. We're going to come down. We're going to hit this trail, cross the creek, take a right. We've got this distinct bend in the trail, At that point, we're going to come off and try to hit this little narrow part of the ridge. So I'm going to be coming from this general direction. What I don't want to try to do is hit the end of that ditch line from there. Because if I try to hit the end of that ditch line and I miss this way, I could be going off into oblivion and hit that trail before I realize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this ditch line as my attack point, but I'm going to hit it more down here. And in fact, if I hit it right in this bend, that would be awesome because I'll know exactly where I am. I'm right in that bend of that. And then if I see this indistinct trail crossing, that's a bonus. But otherwise, I can check out my distance to the end of that ditch line, and then I'm right in the same elevation as my pit. So I'm going to aim for this bend in the ditch line coming off of here. And so if my thought was I want the end of this gully to be my attack point, what I'm doing by aiming here instead is I'm aiming off. So instead of aiming straight for that end, I'm going to aim over here. Because then if I miss it a little bit to the right, that's fine. I'm still hitting the ditch line if I miss it a little to the left. But again, what I don't want to do is try to do a dead reckoning to the end of that gully, because it's going to be too easy to veer off and pass it up. So I'm taking my trail around from my bend of my trail. I'm going up to this skinny part of this ridge. And remember that form line, that little hilltop right there? I know that's going to be noticeable because the mapper put it there. So I'm going to head pretty close to due west off my bend in the trail, keeping my little knoll just to my left. I'm going to see this thick, nasty stuff. I don't want to go there anyway. These parallel green lines means that there's nasty stuff there. Thickets, briars, sticker bushes. So when you're selecting your route, you don't want to go through this stuff that has the parallel green lines. So I'm going to go right up to this little skinny part that's clear. And then I'm going to take a bearing that tries to hit around here. Really anywhere from this bend to the end, anywhere in there, kind of like when we hit that fence earlier. That's a pretty good sized target. So I'm just going to take a bearing, try to hit that target. If I'm really doing well, I'm going to notice this depression. Then I'm going to notice the ditch line. Maybe I notice this distinct trail or indistinct trail. And then I'm going to take another bearing off of the end of my ditch line over to my pit. And I can use this depression as a little waypoint. I've got the stony ground here as a reference point if I end up too far left. So that gives me, once I hit that ditch line, I've got lots of different little waypoints or collecting features that I can try to use to navigate into there. All right. Any other thoughts about that? Diane, you're an experienced orienteer. Would you tackle that differently?
Well, if those briars weren't there, I would be inclined to possibly go up to that other, yeah, up there.
Yeah.
And maybe not maybe go all the way up, but go up to where I'm like right before I got to the, like right in there, shortly before I got up to the top, and then tried to do a bearing. But the yeah, the thickets are nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. But you know, the advantage to that, if you are willing to bear the thickets, one good thing about that is then your stony ground ends up being a good catching feature because you're coming at it from that direction.
Yeah.
You have a little more climb, and yeah, but not really any further to go than if
Yeah,
you do
I was
this.
just, that's why I was noticing with the climb, it looks like it's half a dozen of 1/6 of the other, because you're climbing a little bit, but then you're climbing down and then coming back up a little bit.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's not a bad option either if you're sure of where you need to come off the trail. That would be, I guess, my other concern is not knowing how far along that trail you were.
Yeah, I would use that bend where it bends back to the right as my catching feature.
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
But yeah, the thickets would be my concern.
Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, more than one way to skin a cat. The main thing is making sure you've got a plan.
She didn't mean that, Nikki.
Oh, I didn't mean it. What? Did she say skin a cat? No, no, no.
Oh, he ran away.
Right. So making sure you've got a plan, you know what your attack point is, you've got a catching feature, something as a backstop, so that if you mess it up, you don't go too far out of your way. So a few different ideas for attacking that one. And then one line. Okay, number 38. Oh, here's a long leg. Okay, number 38, we've got the top of an erosion gully, top of a ditch line. And so where you see these, the brown dots, the erosion gullies that are inside this reentrant, right? So where the contour lines are making this V that points uphill, that's a reentrant. That's a broad, it's an erosion gully of its own in a way, but it's bigger and broader. And the land in a reentrant, the soil can be intact. The difference and what causes the mapper to give us this little additional symbol of the dots is an erosion gully is where you've got disturbance of the soil due to the water running down, right? A reentrant is made by water running down over time, but then where you've got a disturbance of the soil due to more recent and active erosion that causes a gully, that's where you get these dotted lines. And where it's especially severe erosion with really steep sides, then the mapper is going to use a solid line like that. So like right here, where you've got the dots, that's an erosion gully that's not that deep. When it gets deeper and has really steep sides, then it becomes this solid line. And what that means is that's going to be something you're going to be stepping down into and having to get back out the other side of. So just to give you a distinction there. So that's why not every reentrant has an erosion gully in it. And not every erosion gully is in a reentrant. You can have an erosion gully that's just in the middle of a hillside if there's sufficient grade to it for the water to run. So just a note on that. So this one is at the clue tells us at the top of this erosion gully. So attack points, and I should have cut this line, but hopefully you can see we've got this trail coming off and then it just ends right there. And that looks to be a distinct trail. It's not marked as indistinct. So that should be a good solid feature for us to use. That should be a good identifiable point right at the end of that. And look at how close it is to our control. So that looks like a great attack point right there. And then if we start to back up from there, we take our trail back, we take trail back. We're coming from here, so you got to figure we're going to make it to this trail, come up this way. You've got a couple of route choices here. You can go down and take this trail. You could stay on this, which is a gravel road coming off the pavement ends here at the horse camp. Becomes a gravel road. So either one of those, the gravel road maybe is a little shorter, kind of hard to tell. It probably doesn't matter a whole lot. If it's that hard to distinguish which is which, then it probably doesn't make a minute's difference, which means you don't want to spend 5 minutes trying to figure out which one's better. But the point is we'll be coming at it from here. So if we keep backing up to get from there to here, we're just going to bomb down this hill. We're going to see these buildings here. And we want to take this little reentrant up, or this little ditch line rather up. So we're going to be kind of careful to make sure as we pick out which ditch line we want. You can see there are 3 different options there. So we'll just be careful to come off that west corner of that building make sure we visualize each of those 3 ditch lines going up so that we hit this one, because that's the one that's going to get us to the trail quickest. We don't want to accidentally go up this one, because then we'll just have to keep climbing up that thick gully. So we're going to hit that one, take our trail, and then we're just going to take a bearing right into our ring entrance. That should be a pretty easy one to hit once we hit the end of that trail. All right, 38, hit the ditch. Oh yeah, this is another one where I wanted to talk about aiming off. So again, super important from the trail to the top of that ditch line. If we try to just do a dead reckoning and hit the end of that, it's going to be so easy to drift off to the left or the east and overshoot that. So this is a great place where aiming off is going to help. So we're going to aim off to the west of that to try to hit over here. And in fact, this is a great place to do it because we've got this little funnel basically. We're going to get funneled into the trail in the ditch line if we aim off that way. And then we can just walk that gully right back up to our point. So good place to use aiming off as a technique. Welcome back, Sarah. Oop, did we lose her again? There she is. So Amy, I was just, not Amy, Sarah, I was just saying that this is another place where aiming off is going to be a really important technique as you try to leave the end of this trail and hit the top of this erosion gully. If you try to hit that dead on, it's going to be really easy to drift high. So this is a great place to aim off to the west of it, and you just get funneled right into this trail and the erosion gully junction. So aiming off, a really good technique to use right there. All right, we're almost there. 38 to 39. And here's where we start to get to some more difficult problems. So 39 is this boulder cluster. The first thing we've got to do is pick out an attack point. And what I can say is good luck. I spent quite a bit of time trying to decide what I would use as my attack point on this one. And this is one where looking at your approach from 38 is going to help for sure, because obviously leaving 38 to go to 39, I'm going to want to take this trail, stay low, and come in here. So I'm seeing myself coming in from this side. And if I do that, then picking out an attack point becomes a little more obvious. What to me is the most obvious location in this vicinity to use as an attack point is going to be right here. Right here, I see, number one, I've gotten to the end of my big spur, right? I'm taking my trail along this hillside. This great big spur is now going away. So that spur's just ended. I've got this valley here that is a creek valley is what it is. You don't really see a creek running through there because it's all dried up because of all the sinks. But I've got a spur with this big flat valley. So that big flat valley is going to be noticeable to me. I'm going to see the end of that spur. And I've got these erosion gullies that are basically, you know, dry creeks. And I've got one that crosses this trail that comes down off that spur. So that point is going to be very distinct when you get out there in the field. So I like that as an attack point, especially because then I can also use what we call collecting features on my way over to this boulder cluster. The collecting features, think of those as like breadcrumbs or waypoints. So here's a collecting feature, a rocky pit, and I can tell you because I've been there, this is like a huge death pit. You don't want to get too close to the edge of this one. We put caution tape around this one the year we had the flying pig in this area because this pit is so humongous, and Mike Minium was sure people would plummet into it. So be careful around this pit. You're not going to accidentally fall into it in the middle of the day. Trust me, it's really big. But so there we've got a pit. That's one collecting feature. And then, so we're going to take a bearing from our junction here, right? Obvious known junction, bearing to this collecting feature. Then we've got another one. We've got this little line of stony ground, so we can look out for that. and another rocky pit. So a bearing from this rocky pit to this rocky pit shouldn't be too hard. That's not too far of a distance to keep a bearing on. And by then, now we've just got this little bit of distance, and this is a boulder cluster, 4 boulder clusters at the end of this spur. So by the time we get to there, we ought to be able to see that. Take a bearing right to the nose of that spur. So by sort of combining our attack point with these collecting features, we gave ourselves what became a new attack point. Really, this pit ends up being our attack point, but we didn't try to navigate to that first. We've used these different features along the way, and then we've got an attack point that gets us into there. So we've really broken down what looked like this, you know, intimidating and possible let. How am I going to find those things out in the middle of this big, huge spur? But we've broken it down into these little bite-sized pieces that's going to make it very doable. So by the time we have our next session where we talk about compass work, you'll be very confident that you can take a bearing to there, a bearing to there, a bearing to there, and hit that. Okay, and then I realized after I put these out there that I didn't have a control that really talked about contouring, but this one offers as a good example. Let's say that our checkpoint, instead of being this boulder cluster, let's say that our checkpoint had been this depression right over here. If our checkpoint had been that depression and we're coming from there, we could have done the same thing but used this boulder cluster as our attack point. And the way we would then get to our depression from this boulder cluster as an attack point, you'll see it's pretty much on the same contour line, which means it's at the same elevation. So from the east end of this boulder cluster, we would have stayed along the same elevation going northeast. So we'd have been going up along this valley towards the creek of this reentrant. So going northeast, staying at roughly the same elevation, we would have used our pace count or something to measure our distance so we would know about how far we needed to go. And that's called contouring, where we basically just make sure we don't go uphill or downhill. We stay along that same contour to get to that depression. So that's what we would have done if that had been our control. So then last, we need to go from 39 to 40. Holy cow, are you kidding me? This tiny little erosion gully in the middle of this big, huge, broad, nondescript hill. That's a super tough one. So this is definitely, we would call this an advanced control. But we're going to break it down again and show you how it's doable. As far as attack points go, to me, the really only obvious attack point, place where I will know that I'm in the right spot, is this hilltop right here. I've got a nice little pointy, tiny hilltop. Yeah, that's small enough and relatively close to my little erosion gully. So that's just about going to have to be my attack point. Getting to there from my boulder cluster, that's not so bad. I'm just going to head due east basically to hit this trail. So due east along the trail, I'm taking the trail around until it starts to bend and I see this ridge going off to my southwest. I'm going to bushwhack out this ridge till I see my little tiny hilltop. And then I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to take a bearing. And you will see that we're basically trying to hit the pointed end of this thing that's nearly pointing right at us. So this is going to be a tough one, but we can do it. We're going to take a bearing, and this is where it's going to be really important to have that person who knows how to pace count, because it's going to be easy to overshoot this thing. It's going to be easy to get off our bearing. But this is where we get into really precision compass work. So we're going to be very meticulous about taking our bearing. And then, because there are 3 of you, you've got a distinct advantage. You can send somebody out in front and have them be your next waypoint. You're basically going to create your own collecting features. You're going to use your teammates as your collecting features. So you're going to take your bearing, you're going to pick something out in the distance, you're going to send a teammate to it. And then you're going to follow up to where your teammate is. You're going to take your bearing again, send a teammate out there. Now, if there's something distinct enough that you can pick it out and you know you can keep your eye on it, then you can just all travel together. But if it's, you know, just a big bunch of indistinct trees and you're going to forget which one you were looking at, this is the sort of place where it makes sense to take the time, even though it's pretty slow, waiting for your teammate to get up there and then going to catch up to her. It's worth it. This is not a huge distance, but it's certainly a far enough distance that you can get off your bearing. And it's not so huge that it doesn't make it worthwhile to go ahead and do this exercise where you send a teammate out ahead, make sure she's on the correct bearing, and then she stands there and waits for you to join her. So you basically are creating your own collecting features from the hilltop down to there. And so if you do that, the other nice thing is by doing that, it's a little bit easier to keep track of your pace counting. So let's say that you take your bearing and you have your teammate go, you know, 20 meters, and then you catch up to her. And then you take another bearing and you go another 20 meters. And so you meter out your pace count that way. Your pace count's going to be more reliable. Your bearing's going to be more reliable, and hopefully you're going to hit this thing dead on. And pace counting is super important, because if you don't hit it dead on, your pace count is the main way you're going to know that, because there's not any great catching feature here. You do have, you'll see that the hillside is steeper here, and then it starts to really broaden out below this. See, there's a much greater distance there to there. So that's one thing you would look for, is that your hillside started to really broaden out and get flat. Obviously, if you drift off to the east, you could maybe see that little tiny reentrant right there. This big main reentrant is your main catching feature to the east. To the west, you've really got nothing unless you recognize that this is the broad nose of this spur. So that's in terms of keeping you from going way off. You would sort of keep an eye on this center line of this reentrant. You would keep an eye on this nose of this broad spur. You're going to have to stay between those. But again, hopefully by using that real precision, you know, this is a place where you go really slowly. You slow it down, take a really precise bearing, be really careful about your pace count. Capitalize on the fact that there are 3 of you. You can use each other as your collecting feature, and try to navigate your way really precisely into that one. That's about all the hope that you have. That's about as difficult to point as, you know, we can create, really, in terms of trying to do, you know, precise navigation. I don't expect that I will give you anything that hard in this race. In fact, this is more just a way of showing you how you could break something like that down and make it doable for you. And then from there, of course, it's super easy. You're just going to bomb down this hill southeast until you hit the road and come into the finish at the little picnic shelter here, which reminds me a couple of things to point out just of interest on this map. So black are the buildings and the cliff lines. This gray color, gray generally denotes that it's empty underneath. So a canopy, for instance. So this gray is the picnic shelter beside the pool house. There's a little, the little black part is where it's enclosed and there are toilets there. And then the gray part is the shelter itself. You also see gray over here. That obviously is not a picnic shelter or anything man-made. That's an arch, right? It's basically a rock canopy, just like this is a building canopy, so it's gray. This is a rock canopy, which means it's an arch. And we have another one over here. That's the top of Shangri-La Arch. That's the top of Smoky Bridge. You see a couple more over here. So those are just places where you've got a hollowed out space underneath a rock, which is an interesting feature of a Carter Paves map. Yeah, so if you all want to unmute, that's all I've got for today. An hour and a half, look at that. I think I was pretty close to perfect this time. Yay. So yeah, those are the topics we're going to cover today. I will tell you that the next class, I want to cover compass work. I'm going to have a class that talks about measuring distance. We'll do a pace counting exercise. We'll do some scale work on the maps, things like that, measurement type stuff. So those will be a couple of the more advanced navigation topics that we'll cover. But are there any questions about any of this? No? Okay. Lisa, this will be recorded. We'll have this on the website, so you can go back and look at that first half hour or so that talked about race planning and strategy and time management and stuff like that. I think you'll find that really helpful. And I think that's it. I'm going to stop recording now. Let's see.